I think podcasting is poised. I saw digital like rise and we saw social and what that did to the overall advertising ecosystem. And it feels pattern recognition wise like podcasting is about to do that.
That's Greg Glenday, the CEO of Acast, the world's largest independent podcast company. In this episode of The Business of Creators, Greg breaks down the future of podcasting, where it's headed, why it's changing fast, and how creators and brands can win as it grows.
I think podcasting is changing and, it's changing quickly. And I think we're set up really well for where it's going.
Greg's watched social, digital, and streaming all have their boom. And now he's betting podcasting's having its moment.
But podcasting is the most open, democratic content platform that's ever existed. There is literally no curation. It is just from the creator to the eardrum, right? So listeners seek them out. It's a piece of content that you went to go find, as opposed to an algorithm deciding that it's going to put it in front of you and hope you like it.
That's what makes it so powerful. No algorithms, no gatekeepers, just creators and audiences finding each other. But Greg also has a message for brands.
Hey, right now for a CMO to bet on podcasting is risky. And we want to de-risk that. We want to make it brand safe. It works. It drives sales. It drives interest. It drives brand.
And when it comes to AI, Greg's take is refreshingly human.
There is no appetite for AI synthetic personalities. People come to podcasting for the companionship. And I think that needs to be authentic. We are not interested in creating 3,000 AI shows. I do not think that there is a market for that. And I think everyone's going to find that out.
If you care about where podcasting goes next, you definitely don't want to miss this one. Greg, Acast is now the largest podcast-only company in the world. What do you think has allowed Acast to scale so successfully?
Yeah, I think, Acast really started as a tech company. And I think the idea that dynamic ad insertion 10 years ago was going to be the future, by leaning into that, I think they made a decision way back then that wound up being really important for us as a company. That became the backbone of how podcasts make money. So as small podcasters started looking for hosts and distribution and monetization, Acast was one of the companies that was doing that on a global basis. I think starting in Stockholm, you look at so many amazing companies have come from Sweden. Per capita, they've created quite a few. I apologize, we're in New York City. There's some horns and sirens. But because we started in Stockholm, where Spotify and Angry Birds and so many interesting companies have kind of come out of there, that moving from Stockholm through Europe to the US was kind of an interesting, kind of the reverse engineer to what other people were doing. So I think we got a little bit lucky that we sort of leaned into what the industry needed globally. And then RSS is sort of, it could be any language. So I think the idea that podcasting is borderless, we've always leaned into that. And I think that's really helped us grow at this pace. To grow this quickly in 10 years is because of the technology.
Be keen to get into the detail. I actually spent some time myself in Stockholm working for King, so I know exactly what you're talking about there.
Yeah.
So you've got more than 100,000 shows on the platform. How would you describe the podcast industry right now?
Yeah, I think, it's maturing. I mentioned to you, we had an offsite. We had a bunch of people from the Acast team around the world come into New York last week. So we've been talking about this a lot. And, since podcasting is 20 years old, I think that's officially how old the word is. Steve Jobs made up the word on stage 20 years ago. Acast is 10 years old. But if you think about it, really, it's the last 2 years where I think podcasting has really matured. It was kind of this wild, interesting thing with, individuals that could just open up a mic with very low cost and start talking to people. No checks and balances, no official business, sort of no regulations. And I do love that about it, that, it's sort of a meritocracy. Anybody can start a show, and if it's good and interesting, listeners will find it. There's no executive Burbank with a tie on that's saying you're worthy of being a podcast. It's just up to you. So I can tell you that the advertisers, I came in with more of a commercial focus in the company, and I started talking to big advertisers about why they weren't in podcasting, and nobody had a really good answer. It was more like, hey, it's difficult. It's hard to buy. We don't really understand it. We realize that it's influential. So I think podcasting is not 20, it's not 10, maybe it's 2 years old as a mature business, and it's happening fast. So I'm really excited about, this feels like the beginning, not the end.
And it's now a $1 billion industry. How do you think about it compared to something like YouTube or TikTok when it comes to creators?
Yeah. going back to like that small nuance point about, you and I could start, we could hit it off on this interview and decide to start a podcast this afternoon, and we could be up and running tomorrow. And we don't have to worry about an algorithm. We don't have to worry about, now we have to promote it. But we don't have to worry about, oh, they've tweaked the algorithm and now nobody's seeing our content. Or it's our head of communications, LP, and I, we use the term sought, not served, right? Listeners go, like, I go find the podcasts that I like, you seek them out. So it's something that, it's a piece of content that you went to go find, as opposed to an algorithm deciding that it's going to put it in front of you and hope you like it. So I think that's really, really unique. And, I think that's what's allowed podcasting to grow. Shows will come and go. And we've all had shows that we've loved, and they start to, oh, wait a minute, they're not as interesting. Maybe they've lost steam, or maybe they've just, and, maybe I listen to them less and I start listening to other stuff more. So I think the idea that listeners can curate their own set of podcasts that are what they listen to. I've probably got 25 in rotation. Some of them are religious. I can't miss them, a couple times a week. Some of them are once in a while, depending on the guest. And some of them are just based on my mood. Like, I may want something funny. And, it's the end of the day. I'm walking the dogs. I don't want any more business podcasts. I want to listen to something that's going to make me relax and laugh. So I think that's what's amazing about it, is you can almost find anything that you can unpack.
And I know that the business has been very vocal about it being open versus a walled garden. Why is it that you've taken that approach?
Exactly what I just said. I'm glad you asked that, because I think, everyone sees a business like this and they try and create these walled gardens around it. And that's not what people want. We send our content. If someone is a host with Acast, and we've got some creators coming in this afternoon into our New York office. We've got a studio here, and it just feels really, really direct. We've got our creators and they've got their audience, right? Acast's job is not to get in the way of that relationship. Our job is to get obstacles out of the way so that they can enhance that relationship. How do we make sure that they can get to more listeners? We've got these really authentic human beings creating shows and really authentic human beings consuming the shows. And then our job is, how do we get those brands and advertisers? How do we let them rent that relationship between those two constituents and make that as easy as possible? Just remove the friction. So that's what we've been trying to do. And I think that's really been working. And that's how, an open ecosystem really encourages that. If we're out there and we see a show getting successful and we start saying, just come to Acast and don't do any, we want those shows to be as successful as possible. So we send our content to over 100 different podcast listening apps, devices, podcatchers, Pocket Casts, from Apple to Spotify. We don't want to tell the listener how to consume it. So that should be up to them. And that should be the relationship between the creator and the listener. So to us, there's really no other way to do it. Podcasting is the most open, democratic content platform that's ever existed. So there is literally no curation. It is just from the creator to the eardrum. And I think that's why it has to be open.
You see it playing out, the difference between RSS driven and Apple and Spotify.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, we're not really focused on where you take any of our shows, from Peter Crouch to Tony and Ryan to the Giggly Squad has exploded here. Giggly Squad has become one of our most important shows. They're hilarious. They reach their listeners in lots of different ways. So everything starts with RSS and it starts with audio. And then however else they want to reach their listeners should be up to them. And again, we want to be able to facilitate that. If it's, some of them are succeeding on YouTube, some of them are seeing YouTube some of their listening, some of them. So every show is different. And so we do a lot of data and insights to help inform them on what makes sense for them. But we're not going to tell them what to do. A lot of them do live events. So, hey, if you're going to meet your listeners at a live event, we'll help find sponsors for that. So it's not just dynamic audio ad insertion through programmatic. We do the automated stuff all the way to the bespoke, live events, tours, YouTube, product placement, all of those things. So I'm excited to see where it goes, but the more agnostic we are, I'm certain there's a platform we don't know about yet that someone's cooking up either in Silicon Valley or somewhere in Stockholm. There's a new platform we don't know about yet, and we're going to be happy to be there.
The fact that you referred to the Peter Crouch podcast there, just a retired British footballer who's doing an amazing job, right?
Yes.
You mentioned at the start about technology and it being primarily a technology company at the start. How much further do you think technology can take monetization for podcasts?
I think much further. I think I love all of our advertisers. We have a lot of direct response advertisers, but it's 2025 and we're still doing, podcasting doesn't feel as advanced as some of the other digital parts of the ecosystem that I've been involved in. And, 10 years ago, I was the CRO for an ad network that had better data than podcasting has now. And that was 10 years ago. So I think we have a long way to go on being able to provide the right data for people, making it a little easier, more certain, what you're getting. But at the end of the day, the reason that the industry is growing is that it works, they get results. So if you're a blue chip advertiser, somebody who's very data sensitive, like a Unilever or a Procter and Gamble, where they really care about data, but you know that there's a platform that will sell products, you're going to find a way to do that. So we just have to help the industry solve that problem and just get a little bit more sophisticated. It's just like, I'm glad you brought up Peter Crouch, because I think every athlete, especially all the American athletes, when they retire, they assume they're going to be famous and have a podcast and go on, and go on. Not all of them, you may not have a great personality for that. I think Peter Crouch is very special. If it's one thing to be witty in the locker room or like on the bus or the plane rides with your team, it's another thing to have a show that you can sustain for years. A lot of athletes have like five good stories, and then what? Then what do you do? Like, you have to be interesting beyond that. So it's not so easy. And the ones that break through, like he has, are a great example of that meritocracy.
Makes absolute sense. And what about AI? It's 2025. How do you see AI impacting podcast discovery, creation, monetization?
Yeah, we're pretty passionate about this, and I think we might have a slightly different point of view than the rest of the industry. But we're pretty dialed in on how we think about it. Actually, we have an incredible head engineer. She's an SVP who runs engineering, and she's got a degree in AI. So we actually have somebody who was doing AI before it was cool. She's got a master's around it. And when we think about it, I actually think there is no appetite for, and I know it's fun and people like to, there is no appetite for AI synthetic personalities. We have Mark Maron retiring next month from podcasting after 16 years. He's one of our shows in the US, and he's amazing, but we have had nobody reach out and say, we would love for you to create a synthetic Mark Maron that will continue on, the show. Nobody wants that. I think the listeners have proven that, like, they'll tolerate some announcers, some AI voices, maybe weather, traffic, sports scores. If it's soulless, I think that that's okay. Maybe around the edges, maybe some stuff with advertising and creating ads. But people come to podcasting for the companionship. And I think that that needs to be authentic. And we're pretty set in stone that that needs to be authentic. We are not interested in creating 3,000 AI shows that are just going to, I do not think that there is a market for that. And I think everyone's going to find that out. So our belief at Acast strongly is genuine human being creator, genuine human being audience, and then we use AI and tech in the middle as much as possible. So we've already gotten much more efficient with smart recommendations and which shows belong on a plan. So we are using AI like crazy, but just not on the content side. I think that is lazy and not what people are looking for. So
So
we
you're
might
not
be
worried.
alone, but we might be alone in that, but we're making a big bet on it.
No, I think that makes sense. And you're not worried about AI voices flooding the market then?
If they do, I think the listeners vote. The listeners will say they do not want that. Like, I don't think anyone's going to be, I mean, there are some fringes and there's people that will listen to anything, but I think podcasting has a long future of genuine content. And I think genuine and authenticity, that's what all the marketers want too. They're looking for authentic content. The reason that Taylor Swift got engaged on a podcast or talk is, 5 years ago, she would have done that on Instagram. And now the reason they wanted to do it is because it was a story to tell. There was an authentic story to tell, to unpack the complex relationship and all the things that happened. It was a story. And that's what podcasting is. If you look at the election, they all call this the podcast election. It's not that people bought ads in podcasts, that the actual candidates and the cabinet members went on these shows so they could unpack their views in a longer form way. So if I'm an advertiser for BMW or Coca-Cola, it's like, well, wait a minute. If these people can influence how people perceive them, my brand should be able to do the same thing. So I think that's what it's going to be. And I think there's a place for AI, but it's going to be in the tech, not in the content.
Taylor Swift example is a great one there. So with regards to AI, can you share what you are working on at all?
Yeah. So The two things that we've leaned into and we've released is in our self-serve platform. It's kind of cool. So we have a self-serve portal where smaller advertisers can go in, and we basically looked at in their like all the places that they were getting stuck. So we've had thousands of advertisers come through and book campaigns. Many of them were getting stuck on, they get confused on what to buy. So they go in, they put their credit card in, they register, they start an account, they start putting all their info in, and then they're like, we don't know what to buy. So we use AI now with the company Podchaser that we have a wholly owned subsidiary called Podchaser that's the biggest data company in podcasting. We use Podchaser data inside our smart recommendations platform. So when someone goes in, they can use natural language. They don't have to be an expert. They can say, I own 100 pizza places in the UK. Here's what my customer base is like. Here's what I'm trying to advertise. What shows should I buy? And we will recommend a dozen shows based on their budget, maybe 50 shows based on their budget. And it will be a bunch of shows at the top, aren't the biggest, but we think will work the best. So we put all of our info in there, attribution data, all kinds of stuff, so we can recommend a media plan for those advertisers. So that's one. And then the other one that we just started doing was creating actual ads, because the creative, many times they don't have a script, or they only have a script, but they don't have a production house. So we've been producing manually ads for these small advertisers. But if someone's spending £20,000 or £10,000 and we're in the studio creating ads for them, that's not really efficient. So we've partnered with a couple of different companies to create essentially a creative studio for AI ads. Put in your script, put in your talking points, and you can get 5, 10, 20 versions of your ad that we can then insert into the shows, and it'll work better. So we're using it for ad creative and ad planning so far, among other efficiency things on the engineering side.
Makes absolute sense. Staying on the topic of AI, do you think we could ever get to a point where there are personalized individual episodes for listeners further down the line?
I think so. I think even ads could get more and more personalized, where it's like, I live in a house with, three teenagers and two adults, and we get different ads, across all of our, digital lifestyle. But as we get better at it, we're starting to figure out, we'll start to figure out how to do that with podcasting. But podcasting is such a one-to-one thing. It's so personal that, all the comparisons to radio and satellite are kind of crazy to me, because I worked in radio. Z100 in New York is an unbelievable radio station, and it reaches 25 million people in the tri-state area in a broadcast. When you're podcasting, you could have that same content, but it's in somebody's AirPods and it's in their ears, and you're having a one-to-one conversation. There is no reason that it needs to be a generalist ad. It should be, I don't want to scare people where we would say, hey, Ian, this is your Marks and Spencer ad, but whatever it is, like, we would make sure that it makes sense. But why not? I think that's the kind of uses for AI that make a ton of sense.
Makes sense. It makes sense. And I always find that podcasting is such a personalized experience. So you're working across the globe in every single market. I'm really fascinated. Like, what sort of trends do you see between different countries?
Yeah, that's another thing that, say it was great planning, but Acast really is lucky in that we are the only true global company doing it this way, like really thinking about, it's somewhat borderless medium, So the way we think about it is, I've got a small enterprise team that are kind of subject matter experts. It could be from ad ops, content, creative sales, revenue, finance. So we've got this small group at the center that's like best practices. But then we allow the markets to localize, because if you think about it, we've got more than half of the market share in the UK. So if you think about the UK, we should have a different approach than somewhere like the US, where nobody has a dominant market share. It's a little bit different here. In Australia, they compete with big radio companies still. Radio is still very cool in Australia. So they compete with radio companies. When we get a show like Tony and Ryan, they joined us last year. Almost a quarter of their listening is outside of Australia. So it's this 5 day a week show. It's male, female host. It's hilarious. They're amazing. They do 5 episodes a week. Their show has listening in the US that we now monetize, because what's the difference? You're not buying an Australian show, you're buying US listens. If someone is in Cleveland, Ohio, but maybe they used to live in Australia, or maybe they found it somehow and they love that show, there's no reason that we shouldn't be able to advertise to that person in Cleveland, Ohio, and so So that's where it started to become really exciting. Now, on the flip side, that makes it really hard when we want to grow in places like Singapore or, France has become a really fast growing market for us because there's so many interesting creators. They kind of do things backwards. In France, our team goes out to many of the digital YouTube creators and they convince them to start a podcast as opposed to the other way around. A podcaster that wants to become a YouTuber, they'll take a YouTuber and say, hey, here's your podcast strategy. Germany is a huge upside for audio. And we just have to, it's a two-sided coin. You have to find content in that language that makes sense and then sales. So it's chicken and the egg. Do you go find the demand and then the supply, or the supply and then the demand? So it's exciting. It's really exciting. And that's really what we're focused on is center of excellence with local nuance to make it make sense for the markets.
And is there any particular regions that you think are ripe for growth at the moment?
Yeah, I think everyone is trying to figure out, where there's tons of population, right? India, we have a couple of shows there. They're doing really well. Monetization is trickier. We have some feet on the ground in Singapore. It's doing sort of our international business. A lot of money is flowing out of China into other markets. So it's really interesting. It's like, where's the content? And then also, where's the demand? So we see a lot of demand from places like China that are buying ads in other markets. And, that's a whole different thing. Export business, and it's a very global medium right now. So we're focused everywhere. I think Latin America is really interesting. But at the end of the day, there's still so much upside in the US that, I think it behooves us to be really focused here in the US as well.
Yeah, I mean it's red hot, and you have platforms like YouTube doubling down on it, TikTok talking about podcasting. How do you think about those cross-platform dynamics?
Yeah, I think it's great. I think for us, we love when our podcasters have YouTube. In fact, we've done some research on the shows that do it right. When they release an episode on YouTube, their RSS listening increases because YouTube has a good flywheel effect of they can take clips. It can become like because of the algorithm, can become a promotional tool for the listening. So I don't think it's anything to be scared of. I think it's something to lean into and that it becomes this sort of omni-channel. We do a lot of branded content and things like that, product placement that could exist on the YouTube platform that wouldn't exist if it was just RSS. So we think that's great and we encourage it.
What makes a successful podcast? We were speaking about Peter Crouch earlier, but for creators listening, what would you advise them?
Yeah, I think it's not as easy as you think. And I think they have to, we really have spent a lot of time and energy trying to help the creators with what best practices work. What makes the industry awesome is also what makes it tricky is that, not every show is the same. Something could work for one show and you try that same tactic and it doesn't work for a different show because it's about a different topic with a different type of listener. Is it a business podcast or is it a business advice podcast? Is it evergreen content or is it something that gets stale very quickly? We love real-time podcasts, things that talk about sports, but I can tell you, I'm an American football fan, college football. By Monday, the content from the Saturday college football podcast is already stale. So what works for them may not work for somebody that's got an always on storytelling, true crime type format. So we're getting pretty good at, what works for different types of podcasters, but there's no one size fits all advice. And I think that's the one thing we've learned is that it's really impossible to do.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Well, Greg, it's been really great to talk today. Before we go, I'd love to just understand where are you placing the bets for the next 5 years? What do you think podcasting will look like in 2030?
Yeah, I think podcasting is poised. And again, I hate to date myself, but I'm old enough that I saw digital like rise and falter and then rise again. We saw social and sort of what that did to the overall advertising ecosystem. And it feels pattern recognition wise like podcasting is about to do that. So right now there's some advertisers that dabble in it. And we've got some big, but it's not a must have part of the media plan. It's going to happen because so much, if you think about what's available to blue chip brands right now, television is not the same, right? It's finally traditional broadcast linear television has finally shifted. And I think the rise of CTV has kind of it's like all bets are off. So I think for podcasting, the next 5 or 10 years is going to be how do we become a standard part of the media plan. Like the old, they always used to say, you don't get fired for buying IBM, you don't get fired for buying, then it became Google, then it became Facebook. And I want it to be like, hey, right now for a CMO to bet on podcasting is risky. And we want to de-risk that. We want to make it that this is the water's warm. This is a safe place for your brands. It's brand safe. It works. It drives sales. It drives interest. It drives brand. You can literally change the way people think about your brand. So we just have to all work together. I think the idea that Acast is going to solve it by ourselves, that ship has sailed. We have to work with our competitors in a way that makes it easier for the industry.
Nice words there. Well, Greg, thank you so much for your time. It's really exciting to see the industry grow, and I'm keen to follow the journey of Acast and watch it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to The Business of Creators. I've got some big guests coming, so be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Now, if this is your first time listening, I'm Ian Shepherd, co-founder and co-CEO of Electrify Video Partners. We invest in large, established creator businesses to accelerate their growth. For creators, that means three things. First, the chance to take money off the table today. Second, the expertise and a team to scale your business faster. And third, a creative transition plan, enabling you to step back or exit the business altogether. We've raised over $100 million and made 10 investments, including YouTube channels Veritasium, Fern, and Fireship. If you're a creator thinking about the next stage, please get in touch to find out more.